That is not the main theme of Final Fantasy VII. Or at least, it is. It's literally the title of the song is main theme of Final Fantasy VII, but bear with me for a second. I'll explain. I, like many kids of my generation, came to Final Fantasy VII by way of Kingdom Hearts. I remember seeing that Cloud guy and thinking, yeah, he seems pretty cool. Also, Final Fantasy VII had a really large presence in Internet Flash movies. I very distinctly remember videos like Legendary Frogs, Final Fantasy VII All About Random Battles, or something like that. And so I was very aware of the Final Fantasy series and very aware of all of these popular games in it, like Final Fantasy VII, and the legend of Final Fantasy VII was so big online that I just couldn't wait to get my hands on it. So I'll never forget the day that my grandma came over with a used copy of it, and finally I was able to play it. So, I rushed downstairs with the game in hand, put it in my PS2, and just that opening cutscene started, and it was so awesome and epic with the camera flying through Midgard and exits Midgard, and you see a huge wide shot of the whole city, and the Final Fantasy VII logo comes up, and then the camera zooms back in, you see this train coming into a station, and then nothing happened from there. Yeah, it turns out the disc was messed up. There was something wrong with it. It couldn't read past that point. I just stood there like an idiot, like those guards on the side, just nothing happening for like 5 minutes until I realized, this is probably not what's supposed to happen. But luckily, we did end up returning that used copy and getting a new one a couple days later, which is this guy right here. So finally, after much trial and error, I was able to play Final Fantasy VII, and man, do the opening hours of that game linger long in my memory. I'd say they probably do for everybody who played Final Fantasy VII at a young age. And there's one song in particular in that opening chapter that I think really exemplifies everything that's so great about Final Fantasy VII and its very particular melancholy, eerie atmosphere. That song is called Anxiety. It used to be called Anxious Heart, or at least that's what YouTube uploads used to call it. Now all the official uploads on streaming services or whatever just call it Anxiety, so that's what we're going to go with today. Of course, Final Fantasy VII soundtrack was composed by the great Nobuo Uematsu, who needs no introduction. If you listen to interviews with him, he'll always talk about his inspirations from progressive rock and bands like Deep Purple or Elton John or the Beatles or things like that, but a lot of the music in Final Fantasy games, while you certainly can draw parallels to progressive rock, especially in his battle themes and things like that, a lot of the other incidental music has very little to do with pop music at all. I think he's maybe mentioned Stravinsky before in regards to certain things like One Winged Angel. But the underscoring in Final Fantasy games has a much broader range of harmonic techniques than you would typically find in pop music, maybe a little bit more common with something like film music. So I've always wondered if there were movie scores or anything like that Uematsu was inspired by. Actually, just the other day, I saw this tweet that kind of made me raise my eyebrows a little bit. Well, the person basically said, man, when I discovered as a teenager that the Final Fantasy VII score is just variations on the score from Twin Peaks, it totally blew my mind. When I first read this tweet, I kind of, it was like, I don't know about this. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, maybe. Of course, Twin Peaks is the great television show by David Lynch and Mark Frost, rest in peace David Lynch, with a soundtrack by composer Angelo Badalamenti, and the mood of Twin Peaks is actually fairly similar to the mood of Final Fantasy VII, this sort of eerie, off-kilter vibe. This tune I'm going to talk about maybe has a little bit in common with Laura Palmer's theme. Not exactly, but a little bit. I don't know, you be the judge. Listen to Laura Palmer's theme and get back to me in the comments and tell me if you think this song Anxiety sounds anything like it. So maybe there's something there, I don't know. I don't think Uematsu's ever mentioned an influence from Twin Peaks, but we can't rule it out, and we know that there were other game developers around this time that were very heavily inspired by Twin Peaks. We know Link's Awakening, for example, had a lot of Twin Peaks inspiration, so who knows? Anyway, let's have a listen to this song. Haunting stuff. This opening section is based around two pairs of chords, where in the first chord the strings swell and rise in volume, and the second chord they go down and lower in volume. So that first pair would be F minor to D minor, and the second pair, A flat to C. So we're in the key of F minor, basically, because if you look at these chords, right, the F minor is, of course, the first chord that establishes the key center. The A flat chord A flat is the relative major of F minor, so all the notes in an A flat major scale are the same notes as in a F minor scale. And this C would be the major 5 chord in the key of F minor. So it's just like the 5 chord that transitions back to the 1 chord. So makes perfect sense. This D minor chord, on the other hand, what's up with that? Well, D minor is very much not in the key of F minor. In fact, D minor is the relative minor of F major, so it's very far away from the key we're in. So there's really not any functional explanation for what this D minor chord is in the context of F minor. I mean, you could basically think of us as modulating down a minor third into a different key for a second into the key of D minor. Even though this D minor chord is very much outside the key of F minor, it has enough in common with an F minor chord that there's actually some really good voice leading opportunities. So if we take this inversion of an F minor chord, right? So we have A flat, C, F. If you want to turn that into a D minor chord, all we have to do is this. So we take the A flat and make it an A. We take the C and make it a D, and then we keep the F the same. So it's just like that. So while these chords are very different, they actually flow into each other very nicely, which Uematsu takes advantage of in the arrangement. I'll play along with one of the inner voices of the string part so you can kind of hear how he takes advantage of that voice leading opportunity. It's just gorgeous. So to me, this D minor chord is really what makes the composition. It's what gives it the kind of eerie and unsettling vibe and, adds a little bit of that interesting chromatic color to the chord progression. Talk about this harp melody a little bit because it does something I think is really, really cool, which is kind of selectively choosing which notes of the melody to harmonize. So like you have this melody that goes something like this. Right? But there are certain notes in the melody that he chooses to harmonize with one note underneath. So what it actually sounds like is more like this. What's cool about it is like he could have chose to harmonize none of it. He could have chose to harmonize all of it. Like he could have done something like, I don't know. Something like that, right? But instead, he chooses specific notes out of that melody to add the harmony to, which ends up creating almost like a little counter melody in the harp line. So when you have this playing on top, you then have this underneath. So like, I'll play both parts separately so you can see what I'm talking about. It's just so tasteful. I love those chromatic moves. Those string pads are so gorgeous. Oh, that's beautiful. We're in the key of F major now. So let's talk about this third section. Now we've modulated to the key of F major, although the other chords, this E flat and D flat, are borrowed from the minor key, so they are borrowed from F minor. What's cool about this is that now all of the other instruments have dropped out of the arrangement, and all we're getting is this Celesta part, or whatever that sample is. Very simple, like the left hand is just playing this, power chords, right? while the melody is later on top. But what makes it sound so rich is that the Celesta just has this really long sustain. So all of those notes of the melody bleed into each other and create this giant, gorgeous texture of a chord. I especially love this E flat chord, which has this note here, right? It has the A over the E flat major chord, which is basically like a Lydian sound, right? Sharp 4. But of course, this flat 6, flat 7, 1 thing is very common in rock music, and of course very common in Uematsu's music. But it just transitions so perfectly back to the F minor, where we have that, and then back to F minor. Really an F minor 7. That is just beautiful. Haunting, but beautiful. Wait! Did you know I'm making a video game? It's called Detective Instinct Farewell My Beloved, and it's an adventure game similar in style to Famicom Detective Club, Ace Attorney, and Hotel Dusk. It's coming later this year, and if you want to, you can wishlist it on Steam. I would greatly appreciate if you did. In fact, if there's one thing you do from this video, it's not like, it's not subscribe, and it's not comment. It's wishlist my game on Steam. Link in the description. Thank you so much. So stepping away from music theory stuff for a second, can we just talk about these samples? I love live instruments, and in most cases I tend to prefer using live instruments, even video game music, because I just think that the amount of emotion that an actual player can bring to a part far exceeds anything that a computer can do. But that said, there are times where I think some of these older games benefit from the samples that they have, because the samples themselves take on their own identity and become kind of identified with the game itself. So like, you know, I love what they did with the soundtrack to this game in Final Fantasy VII Remake and in Rebirth, but when I hear a string section in Final Fantasy VII Remake, it just sounds like a live orchestral string section, whereas, you know, when I hear this, like, man, that just sounds like Final Fantasy VII to me. And, you know, there are things you can do with samples to try to inject some humanity into a computer-played part, right? Like in this song, the tempos really fluctuate. You know, it almost has sort of a rubato feel, like somebody's actually conducting it. Let's listen to the intro again and just pay attention to how much longer some of these string chords last than the other ones. Here it almost sounds like a 4 count versus a 5 count. Let's see if I can count along with it. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Yeah, see, it's almost like a 4 versus 5 count. This one's really long. This one's really stretched. Ooh. Gorgeous, gorgeous. So while this song may not have a melody as iconic as, you know, what it does do is communicate the themes and atmosphere of Final Fantasy VII better than any other song in the soundtrack. I mean, when I think of Final Fantasy VII, this is the song that first comes to mind. I feel like I can't be alone in that, right? Well, let's take a look at the comments under the official video soundtrack from the Square Enix music channel. First comment, True Man theme of Final Fantasy VII. All right, but no, seriously, it perfectly encapsulates the essence of the game's atmosphere, especially in the first half of it. Well said, Shirkus Murphalovsky. I agree. But I would like to hear what you think. Are there other songs in the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack that you think maybe are a contender for real main theme of the game? Please let me know in the comments. And if you're so inclined, maybe like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this, and don't forget to wishlist Detective Instinct Farewell My Beloved on Steam. The link is in the description. Thanks everybody, and until next time, peace! This Final Fantasy VII box has really seen better days. Like, watch this. Whoops. Okay.